Right now, somewhere above your head, thousands of machines are racing through the darkness of space, whispering to one another with beams of light, and most people have no idea that this silent conversation could redefine how humanity thinks about connection, speed, and possibility. We live in a world that feels instantly connected, yet we still accept delays, dead zones, and invisible limits as if they are laws of nature, when in reality, they are simply temporary barriers waiting to be challenged. The story of Starlink is not just about satellites or internet access, but about a mindset that refuses to accept the world as it is, and instead asks how it could be better, faster, and more fair for everyone. At the heart of this story is a radical shift in how data moves across the planet, not crawling through cables buried under oceans, but leaping through space itself, guided by precision, ambition, and an almost stubborn belief that progress should serve the entire globe. This vision echoes the broader philosophy often associated with Elon Musk, where impossible problems are broken down into first principles and rebuilt from the ground up with relentless clarity. Starlink satellites are not isolated tools floating aimlessly above Earth. They are members of a carefully designed network, constantly aware of one another, constantly adjusting and constantly optimizing the path that information takes from one point on Earth to another. Instead of depending entirely on ground stations that slow data down and limit coverage, these satellites use laser inter-satellite links that allow information to move directly through space, hopping from satellite to satellite like a relay of light. This approach turns the sky into a dynamic, self-correcting mesh network, one that can route data around congestion, geography, and even political boundaries, all in fractions of a second. The philosophical weight of this idea is easy to miss, because it sounds technical. But what it truly represents is freedom from old constraints, a reminder that the systems we rely on are not fixed truths, but design choices. As data travels through this orbital network, it follows the most efficient path available, sometimes crossing entire continents without ever touching the ground, reducing latency in ways that traditional infrastructure simply cannot match. This matters because latency is not just a number. It is the difference between lag and responsiveness, between waiting and acting, between feeling connected and feeling distant. In a world where decisions are made in milliseconds and opportunities can vanish just as quickly, shaving time off communication is not a luxury, it is a transformation. Yet even as this system operates with breathtaking elegance, there is an underlying tension that builds beneath the surface of the story, because creating a network in space is not merely an engineering challenge. It is a test of coordination, trust, and resilience on a global scale. Each satellite must know where it is going, and which neighboring satellites are best positioned to receive and forward data, all while hurtling through orbit at incredible speed. A single miscalculation could ripple through the network, slowing everything down, and this fragile balance introduces a quiet suspense that mirrors the uncertainty of any bold innovation. The question lingers in the background, unspoken but powerful. Can such a complex system truly work at scale? And can it remain reliable when the stakes are global and the margin for error is razor thin? This uncertainty is part of what makes the story compelling, because it reflects a deeper human truth about progress itself. Every leap forward carries risk, and every new system challenges the comfort of what came before. Starlink's space-based communication model asks us to trust not only in technology, but in our capacity to manage complexity responsibly and ethically. It forces us to confront the idea that the future of the internet may not be anchored to the ground at all, but instead woven into the fabric of space, moving at the speed of light, guided by algorithms that never sleep. As this realization settles in, it becomes clear that we are not just watching the evolution of connectivity, but standing at the edge of a broader shift in how humanity solves problems. A shift that values bold experimentation over cautious stagnation. The real power of Starlink's inter-satellite communication lies not only in faster downloads or wider coverage, but in the message it sends about what is possible when imagination is paired with execution. It suggests that distance is no longer the barrier it once was, that the planet is smaller than we think, and that the limits we feel today may simply be the result of outdated assumptions. This first glimpse into the silent conversations happening above us invites a sense of wonder. but it also sets the stage for deeper questions about control, dependency, and the future direction of global infrastructure. We are only at the beginning of this story, and the quiet glow of lasers in space hints at changes that could reshape economies, cultures, and individual lives in ways we are only starting to understand. As we look upward, curiosity grows, anticipation tightens, and the realization dawns that the next chapter of connectivity may challenge power structures, redefine access, and force humanity to decide whether shared progress or narrow control will guide the networks we depend on in the decades that are rapidly approaching for everyone. As the satellites continue their silent exchange above Earth, a deeper layer of the story begins to unfold, one that reveals not just how the system works, but why it matters on a human level. For decades, global internet infrastructure has been shaped by geography, politics, and the physical limitations of cables stretched across oceans and continents, creating invisible lines between those who are connected and those who are left waiting. Starlink challenges this old framework by treating space not as a distant frontier, but as a practical solution to a very real problem. And this shift forces us to rethink assumptions that have quietly guided technological development for generations. When data no longer has to take the longest path simply because that is where the cables lie, the world starts to feel different, smaller, and more immediate. The laser inter-satellite links act like decision makers in orbit, constantly evaluating the fastest and cleanest route for information, adapting in real time as conditions change below and above them. This adaptability is crucial because Earth is not static. Storms disrupt ground stations, infrastructure fails, and demand surges unpredictably. Yet the network in space can reroute data almost instantly, maintaining continuity where traditional systems might falter. Beneath this elegant efficiency, however, lies a growing sense of suspense, because such a powerful system inevitably raises questions about dependency and trust. When so much of global communication depends on a network orbiting hundreds of miles above the planet, what happens when something goes wrong, or when interests collide? This tension mirrors a broader philosophical concern about modern technology, where convenience often arrives hand in hand with vulnerability. The very feature that makes Starlink revolutionary, its independence from ground-based pathways, also makes it a single point of influence, and that reality cannot be ignored. Yet innovation has always walked this narrow path, balancing risk against reward, and the architects of this system seem fully aware that resilience must be built into every layer. Redundancy, constant monitoring, and autonomous decision-making are not just technical features, but philosophical commitments to reliability in an unpredictable world. This is where the inspiration associated with Elon Musk becomes particularly relevant, because the drive to question foundational assumptions and accept calculated risk is central to creating breakthroughs that actually change the rules of the game. Starlink's mesh network is not about replacing everything overnight, but about offering an alternative that proves a different model can work, one that prioritizes speed, flexibility, and global reach. As the network grows denser, with more satellites filling orbital planes, its ability to reduce latency across continents becomes increasingly pronounced, creating a feedback loop where performance improves as scale increases. This creates a subtle but powerful suspense point in the story, because success itself brings new challenges, including congestion in orbit, regulatory scrutiny, and the need for international cooperation. The question shifts from whether the system can function to whether it can grow responsibly. And that question hangs in the air like an unresolved chord in music, demanding attention but offering no easy answers. Meanwhile, down on Earth, the implications ripple outward in ways that are both inspiring and unsettling. Remote communities gain access to information and opportunity. Businesses operate across borders with less friction, and individuals experience a level of digital equality that once felt unreachable. At the same time, established institutions must adapt to a landscape where control over infrastructure is no longer confined to national borders, forcing a re-evaluation of governance, security, and fairness. This duality is what gives the story its philosophical weight, because it highlights the reality that progress rarely arrives without forcing society to confront uncomfortable truths. The satellites do not care about politics or ideology. They simply follow physics and code. yet their presence reshapes the world below in ways that demand human judgment and ethical clarity. In the middle of this transformation, suspense deepens as humanity stands between two futures. One where space-based connectivity becomes a shared utility that lifts everyone, and another where it becomes a contested asset that amplifies existing inequalities. The technology itself is neutral, but the choices surrounding it are not, and this realization adds urgency to the conversation. Starlink's ability to move data through space without touching the ground feels almost magical. But magic fades quickly if it is not guided by purpose and accountability. As the network hums quietly overhead, the real drama plays out in how people respond, adapt, and decide what kind of connected world they want to build. The story is no longer just about faster internet, but about whether humanity can align innovation with values, ambition with responsibility, and speed with wisdom. This moment, suspended between potential and consequence, is where the narrative tightens, because the outcome is not predetermined. The lasers continue to flash, data continues to flow, and the future continues to approach, inviting reflection on whether this new architecture of connectivity will ultimately deepen our shared understanding or simply accelerate the pace at which unresolved questions reach us all. As the final pieces of this story settle into place, it becomes clear that what is happening above our planet is not just a technical achievement, but a reflection of how humanity chooses to confront its limits. The Starlink network, constantly shifting and self-organizing, represents a belief that complexity does not have to lead to chaos, and that even the most ambitious systems can be designed to learn, adapt, and improve over time. Each satellite is both independent and interdependent, acting alone yet contributing to a greater whole. And this balance mirrors the challenge faced by societies trying to stay connected without losing autonomy. The data racing through space is invisible, but its impact is tangible, reshaping how people work, learn, collaborate, and imagine their place in a world where distance matters less with every passing second. As latency drops and responsiveness rises, communication begins to feel less like a transaction and more like a natural extension of thought, collapsing the gap between intention and action. This shift quietly alters expectations, because once people experience near-instant connection across continents, the old delays begin to feel unnecessary, even unacceptable. Suspense still lingers here, not because the technology might fail, but because success demands a redefinition of responsibility. When systems become powerful enough to influence global behavior, the question is no longer whether they work, but how they are guided. The philosophy often associated with Elon Musk surfaces again, not as a personality cult, but as an example of thinking that treats constraints as puzzles rather than walls, insisting that bold solutions are worth the discomfort they create. Starlink embodies this approach by refusing to accept that the internet must be tied to the ground, proposing instead that the fastest paths are the ones written in the sky. Yet the future it points toward is not guaranteed to be simple or universally welcomed, because every leap forward redistributes power in ways that can unsettle established systems. As satellites multiply and coverage expands, governments, industries, and communities are forced to respond, sometimes with excitement and sometimes with resistance. This friction is not a flaw, but a signal that something meaningful is changing, because stagnant systems rarely provoke debate. The suspense reaches its peak when we realize that the technology itself is already ahead of our collective conversation about how it should be used, governed, and shared. The lasers will keep flashing, regardless of our readiness, moving information along optimal paths while humans argue about borders and control. In that contrast lies a quiet challenge, asking whether our social structures can evolve as quickly as our engineering. The promise of a space-based mesh network is enormous, offering resilience during disasters, opportunity in remote regions, and a platform for innovation that does not privilege geography. At the same time, it demands vigilance to ensure that access remains broad and that the benefits do not concentrate in the hands of a few. This tension is the defining feature of the moment, because the same system that can unite can also divide if left unchecked. As viewers reflect on this unfolding reality, inspiration emerges not from the hardware alone, but from the invitation to think bigger about what connectivity means. It is an invitation to imagine a world where ideas travel freely, where collaboration is limited more by creativity than by bandwidth, and where the sky itself becomes part of our shared infrastructure. The story of Starlink suggests that the future is not something that simply arrives, but something that is built through countless decisions, large and small, technical and ethical. The satellites overhead are tools, powerful ones, but they are also mirrors, reflecting humanity's priorities back at us with relentless clarity. Whether this new architecture of the internet becomes a foundation for shared progress or a source of new tension depends on choices that are still being made. In that uncertainty lies both risk and hope, because the same ingenuity that launched thousands of satellites can also guide the principles that govern them. As the network continues to grow, so does the responsibility to align speed with wisdom and innovation with purpose, ensuring that the light flashing between satellites carries not just data, but the values of a connected human future. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.